People are moving to Texas in droves, and there's a lot of good reason for that. We have available jobs, we have a great economy, we have available housing, and a lot of room to grow. But the most important reason people are moving to Texas is because of cost of living. At this time of taping in 2022, where costs of literally everything are going through the roof, Texas is a downright bargain compared to a lot of other places in the nation. For instance, statistics show us that it costs 32% less to live in Texas than it does in California right now. Cha-ching! So if you're thinking about making a move to Texas, this video is for you. Stick around. What is up, all my internet friends? I'm Jeff with Jeff West Properties, your host for the Conroe Living Channel, where we identify and celebrate everything that makes Conroe, Texas, one of the fastest growing cities in the entire nation. Now, this is a YouTube channel, so you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Please don't forget to like,
comment,
subscribe.
This is a brand new channel, so I'd appreciate the support. Also, don't forget to click on that notifications bell. I make new content every week, and you'll be notified whenever it comes out. Personally, I think these videos are great, and knowing you as well as I do, I'm sure you'll agree. Okay, what you came here for, the cost of living in Texas. Now, depending on where you live, it's gonna make a difference. So I'm gonna speak in general about Texas, and then I'm gonna talk more specifically about my city, Conroe, Texas. Now, it's important to note that even though Texas is an affordable place to live, each individual expense may not be as favorable to the places that you may be coming from. So I'm gonna break down all the expenses, housing, utilities, insurance, etc., so that you don't end up getting surprised by some of these. I'll start with the good stuff and then move on to the not so good stuff. Okay, let's start with getting around. Now, regardless of what you may have heard, the main form of transportation in Texas is not the horse. Texas is definitely a car culture, and that's very much true of Conroe. It's not a very walkable city. So here's what it'll cost you to own and operate a vehicle in Texas. Let's start with registration. Vehicle registration is very affordable compared to a lot of other places. Using examples from the most popular places where people tend to be moving from, as you can see on this chart, that it's up to $140 in New York, depending on the weight and axles of your vehicle, up to $84 in New Jersey, $120 in Massachusetts, $225 in Florida, $60 in Minnesota, and $15 in Illinois. In California and Arizona, two more popular places people are relocating from, it's based on the actual value of your car. California, it's $69 in base fee plus 0.65% of the value of your car. And in Arizona, it's $2.89 per $100 value of your car. That means on a $60,000 car, that's $1,739 to register. When I was in my 20s, I moved out to Arizona, and the sticker shock of registration almost killed me. It definitely does not pay to have an expensive car out there. Texas, on the other hand, it's $75 flat fee to register your vehicle, so it's a pretty affordable option compared to other places. That same thing is true for the cost of gas. Again, looking at the chart, you can see as of this taping, here are the average costs per gallon. In New York, it's $4.75, New Jersey, $4.65, Massachusetts, $4.69, Florida, $4.33, Minnesota, $4.57, Illinois, $5.08, and Arizona, $4.89. And then the West Coast, we have California at $5.99 and Washington at $5.30. In Texas, it's $4.13, so it's very affordable. I mean, we make it all, we should get a discount. Now, in order to actually operate a car in Texas, of course you have to have insurance. Texas isn't the cheapest place for car insurance, but it's a lot cheaper than a lot of other places. Again, looking at the chart, you could see it's somewhere in the middle. Now, there's one other vehicle expense that isn't a necessity, but it's a necessity. Texas is a huge, wide open state, and it's got several of the largest cities in America. So getting around, you're gonna need a toll pass. I had a client I was showing houses to that chose to drive himself, and between one property and the next, it took him 30 minutes longer to get there than I did because he didn't have a toll tag. So you can avoid paying tolls, but it's gonna be a real headache after a while if you plan on doing a lot of driving. As far as Houston goes, there are several toll freeways starting from the north in the Woodlands. There's the Hardy Toll Road that takes you almost all the way from the Woodlands to downtown Houston. There are a few other toll roads that provide straight shot between two populated points. The way Houston's set up, there are 3 loops around the city. 610 is the inner loop, which is just a regular freeway. The next ring out is the Sam Houston Tollway, or Beltway 8, that goes all the way around the city. And then the newest is Grand Parkway 99. It has been built in 4 stages, with the last one not yet completed in the southwest. When it's fully completed, it'll be almost 200 miles long, which would make it the largest loop around a city in the entire world. The greater Houston area is a huge area, and a lot of our population is spread out in the suburbs, so that Grand Parkway is a great way to get between one suburb and the next. So with 3 parts completed of the Grand Parkway, right now it starts in the southwest of town in Sugar Land. Then it goes up to Katy in the west, Cypress and Tomball in the northwest, then circles around north to the Woodlands before going northeast to Kingwood and then going southeast to Baytown. Now, people normally drive about 100 miles an hour on the Grand Parkway, so you can get where you're going pretty quickly. Now, please understand, I don't condone driving that fast, in case you're a cop.
If you're a cop, you have to tell me, right?
But I'm just saying it happens. So with all these tollways, tolls range from about 50 cents to about $3.20, which is the most expensive, and that's on the Grand Parkway. Okay, next we're going to look at healthcare costs. Again, looking at the chart comparing to the other states that we talked about, Texas isn't the cheapest, but it isn't the most expensive. It's somewhere right in the middle. I did want to draw your attention to something interesting. The 3 most expensive states for health insurance are Vermont, Wyoming, and Alaska. Those 3 states are about $300 more than the average healthcare cost per month. Now, I can understand Alaska and Wyoming, with all the random moose and bear attacks. But Vermont, what is going on in Vermont that healthcare costs are so expensive? Is it syrup related? Okay, now let's look at food costs. Now, obviously, it's going to be different. Some people choose to eat at Smith & Wollensky's every night, and other people choose to eat at McDonald's. So the best way to compare states is by looking at the staples, what it costs per person for groceries. This is another place that Texas really shines, being the 7th least expensive state for food supplies at $286 per person per month. The state with the least expensive food costs is New Hampshire at $183 per person per month. Hawaii is the most expensive place for groceries, which makes sense because you've got the added freight cost of getting it to the islands. But you know what I find really interesting is that the 2nd most expensive place for groceries is Vermont. So that makes no sense to me. New Hampshire is the cheapest place for groceries in the nation, and Vermont is the 2nd most expensive. It's the same state. It's basically just one Colorado turned on its side. If you live in Vermont, can you explain to me what's happened? Oh, you know what? I think I understand it. Vermont has the most expensive healthcare costs, and it's also got the most expensive food costs. I think people in Vermont must eat really rich food, which leads to all the healthcare. Okay, boom, problem solved. I'm a genius. Now here's one final bit of good news. Texas has no state income tax, so that can make a pretty substantial difference. I hope that that good news will soften the blow for what's about to come next, because it's about to get ugly. Okay, let's just get this out of the way, rip the Band-Aid off now. Texas has the 5th highest property taxes in the nation. So if you're living in a place like New Jersey where it's the most expensive, maybe that's not a big deal to you.
What are you going to do?
But compared to the other 44 states below it, it's a pretty big deal. Now, a little bit of good news on that, it's not one blanket rate, so you still have a little bit of choice. For instance, in my city of Conroe, Texas, we have a low tax rate of 1.9% to a high of almost 3.4%, which is pretty substantial. So to put that in perspective, take a median home price, $400,000. If you live in the 1.9% property tax, you're paying about $7,600 a month in taxes. But if you live in the 3.4, you're paying just a little over $13,000. So it's more than a $5,000 difference in taxes per year, depending on where you live. It's a pretty big deal. So why is there such a big discrepancy between tax rates? Okay, I'll break down what everybody's taxes go to. So everyone is going to pay a county tax. Everyone is going to pay for an emergency services tax. And if you live in an area that's zoned to community college, you're going to have that tax as well. Now, the biggest chunk of what you're going to pay is found in the school district tax and the municipal utilities district tax if you don't live in a city. Most of you will understand what a school district tax is, but the municipal utilities district throws a lot of people off who've not been here before. The municipal utilities district, or MUDs as we call them for short, which makes no sense because it would actually be municipal utilities district. We really should be calling them the M districts. Anyway, a MUD is a subdivision of the state of Texas that's designed to build and maintain the city infrastructure when it falls outside of a city jurisdiction. The MUD provides water, sewer, drainage, etc. The MUD is really the biggest X factor to what your taxes are going to be. So in an area that's being developed, those costs are paid for by a bond that is then paid for by the taxes of the people who live in that area. So chances are, if you're living in a shiny new area, your property taxes are probably going to be pretty high. Areas that have municipal utilities districts that have been established for a long time usually have those bonds paid off, so the taxes tend to be lower. That's why it's really imperative, if you are moving to Texas, that you start by working with a local realtor who can give you all the local information, including the taxes. There are some areas in my city that have been long established that are amazing places to live, and the property taxes are lower. There are also some up and coming areas that you don't really get that much more for your money for what you have to pay and the difference in property tax. As well as being a realtor, I'm also an investor, so I renovate and flip properties. And those tend to be in some of the older established neighborhoods, and people absolutely love them because you end up getting basically a new house and the property taxes are a lot cheaper. To give you a real world example of how property taxes can bite you, I mentioned earlier that I lived in Arizona in my 20s. Well, I moved back about 8 years later and I sold my house in Phoenix for about $250,000. Man, I wish I had those days back. And I thought I would just buy a $250,000 house in the Houston area, in Sugar Land specifically, where I moved. Now, we don't have state income tax, so I thought I was going to be in pretty good shape. Well, the first shock came from the fact that different counties have different tax rates, and I just happened to be moving into the most expensive taxed county in the state of Texas, Fort Bend County, which was 2.23% right off the bat. On top of that, I moved into a new house in a new area, so I had the high MUD taxes on top of it. So looking at all the numbers, in the end, in order for me to keep my mortgage payment the same, even putting 20% down, I could only buy a house that cost no more than $220,000, so a $30,000 difference in the actual price of the house. Now, the silver lining in all of that is what I got for $220,000 in Texas was still superior to what I got for $250,000 in Arizona. Again, Texas is just a really affordable place to live and you get a lot for your money. Now, a side note on monthly housing expenses. Most places where people are coming from, you're going to be familiar with HOAs, homeowners associations. And they are pretty much the same everywhere. What you pay depends on what your community amenities are. For instance, I lived until recently in Walden on Lake Conroe. And in that community, we had boat launches, we had a yacht club, we had a country club, as well as pools and tennis courts. And for all of that, I paid about $1,200 a year to the homeowners association. Here's something to look out for in case you're thinking about doing something like condo living. I had a client who chose to move here to downsize, and they bought a condo on Lake Conroe. That condo had its own HOA, which charged about $300 a month for their amenities. Now, they had to pay that on top of what the Walden fees were, and so it was about $5,000 a year in community association fees for them, which they were not expecting. I have another good friend who is living in a condo in downtown Houston across from the convention center, and for his amenities, just because of location, he was paying $1,200 a month just for the association fees. So if you're thinking about moving into a condo or a townhome, make sure you check those things out when you're looking at your overall budget. Now, if you're going to own a home, of course, you have to have that home insured, so here is your next set of bad news. Texas has the 5th highest home insurance rates in the entire nation. So if you take a look at the chart, as you can see from these averages, Texas is quite a bit more expensive to insure than a lot of the other states where people are coming from. They say it's because we have unique factors in our potential disasters like hail damage, tornadoes, hurricanes, and floods, which is actually a separate insurance that I'll talk about in a minute. But if you look at this list, for the most part, it makes sense. Every place in Florida is no more than 50 miles from the beach, so hurricanes are going to be a major factor. But what I don't understand is California. Home insurance rates in California are 46% lower than the national average, which doesn't make sense to me because every time I look, it seems like somebody's house is sliding into the ocean or catching on fire. But them's the facts. Now, here's another silver lining within the bad news. Depending on where you live, your home insurance rates can vary pretty widely. Texas is expensive, and Houston is actually more expensive than the Texas average at almost $3,700 a year to insure your house, whereas Conroe is just over $2,100. So Conroe, again, is even more of a bargain to live in than other places in Texas.
Winning!
Now back to flood insurance, which I mentioned earlier. It is a separate policy, and if you live in other places in Texas, it really may not apply to you. But if you live anywhere along the coast, and especially in the Houston area where I'm from, flood insurance is pretty important. Now, you don't have to carry it if you don't live in the 100-year to 500-year floodplain, but I would still suggest that most people do. In the last decade, we've been hit pretty hard by several floods. In 2017, 1 in 10 homes in the Metroplex flooded in Hurricane Harvey, which ended up being the most expensive natural disaster in history. Many of those houses weren't even in the floodplain. When I was growing up, I grew up in a subdivision called River Plantation in Conroe, and it was a beautiful area, probably one of the nicest areas at the time in Conroe, but it was prone to flooding, and it got worse as time progressed, especially in certain parts like the part that I lived. I went back to the street that I grew up on a little while back, and about half the houses that were on my street aren't there anymore. Insurance wouldn't pay out anymore on those houses, so they just paid them off and bulldozed them all. During Hurricane Harvey, I saw my old street on the news when someone with home video footage was assessing the damage, and I recognized my street by one of my neighbor's houses, and I could only recognize it by the roof, which just happened to be the only thing showing and visible. Flooding here can be disastrous. So my advice, carry flood insurance. If you don't live in a floodplain, it's about a $500 policy for the year. And if it is in a floodplain, I may suggest you not look at buying those houses. The last big expense to talk about are your utility costs. Now, most of the things you're going to pay for are going to be similar to what you're paying for where you come from. Your internet's going to be the same. Your cell phone plans are going to be the same. Your water and trash, things like that are all going to be similar. Where we get hit pretty hard in Texas is the electric and gas bills. The most misleading bill you can have is the electric bill, because statistics show that the average 3-bedroom, 3-person house, the electric bill will cost you about $132 a month. But the operative word is average, because some months are definitely going to be more expensive than others. That's why if you can, get an electric bill that allows you to average out and pay the same monthly cost from January to December. If you don't, you could be in for a very rude awakening. That same $132 per month bill will cost you about $500 a month once June through August rolls around and your air conditioner never stops running.
That's hot.
Now here's another as of this taping issue that hopefully won't last, but as of late spring, the natural gas prices went through the roof, rising as much as 70%, which is what fuels the electric companies. So right now, that $500 summer bill could be closer to $850. Like I said, rude awakening. Longtime Texans like myself were shocked by this huge price increase. So again, I would recommend if you can have a yearly rounded out bill, go ahead and use that route. Another thing that seems like good news, although I'm not really sure it helps that much, is that Texas is a deregulated state when it comes to energy costs, which means we have literally hundreds of companies to choose from when you're shopping for insurance. The problem is they have these really confusing programs that you can get in trouble if you don't read the fine print. One thing that happened recently to me, there was a person going door to door representing an insurance company that was trying to get people to make the switch. And they were offering a $200 gift card if you would make the switch to their company that they would send you 3 months after you were on their plan. What they didn't tell you was the company that you switched from had a $200 penalty that was due on your last payment as soon as you made that switch. So it actually ended up costing you more money right out of the gate to make that switch.
Much too sneaky.
So again, really important to read the fine print. Those are the basic costs of living in Texas. So you could take those and decide whether or not it actually makes sense for you to relocate here, if that's something you're thinking about doing. One group that I didn't address in this video were first-time home buyers. There are a lot of people living in Massachusetts, New York, California, and they can't afford to buy a house where they are there, but if they move to Texas, they have an opportunity to own a home for the first time. There are a lot of costs associated with first-time home ownership, and you don't know what you don't know. So if you're interested, you may want to check out this video on first-time home buyers in the state of Texas. Thanks for watching.